Hi Guy, welcome back TV spoilers. That day at Newman Ranch wasn't just a negotiation. It felt like a sealed box filled with gas, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite it. Jack arrived carrying the composure of a man who believes control can be maintained through discipline and principle. But underneath that steady posture sat the weight of a gamble he knew could cost the Abbott family its name, its safety, and whatever fragile trust still existed between two dynasties that had never truly stopped wounding each other. Kyle walked beside him, younger but not lighter. He carried ambition like a blade, determined to prove he could do what others only dared to discuss. And he carried a very real fear that one misstep would turn their plan, dragging Matt to the ranch as leverage into a stain that would never wash out. And Matt, escorted and under guard, entered Newman Ranch the way a seasoned predator enters an enclosure it has already mapped. He didn't move like a cornered captive. He moved like a man who lived off other people's cracks, who survived by reading the microtremors behind calm faces and listening to the silence between decisions. The moment they crossed into Victor's territory, the air changed. The ranch itself radiated power and ownership. The kind of place where control wasn't requested, it was assumed. Jack understood that, which only made him hold his spine straighter, push his feet forward like nothing here could make him flinch. Kyle understood it too, but he felt as if the walls were listening, as if every step was being measured for weakness. As if one wrong breath could turn him into a reckless boy who'd walked his own throat into a noose. The Abbott security team kept formation and tried to look unshakable, but their very presence was an admission. The Abbotts were stepping onto the Newman's board with pieces they weren't fully sure they could protect. Matt watched the entire arrangement without rushing. He studied Jack like a man forcing himself not to bend. He studied Kyle like a flame, hot, bright, and easy to smother if you hit it at the right moment. He studied the guards like links in a chain, each one capable of snapping if pressure was applied at the correct angle. And most of all, he sensed what Jack and Kyle were trying to disguise beneath strategy and planning: the division in that room wasn't just about business leverage. It was history, pride, old scars that never healed cleanly. Those cracks were Matt's true escape route. He didn't need to be stronger than them. He only needed them to weaken for one beat. The negotiation was staged like a ritual of controlled tension. Jack and Kyle brought Matt in as a bargaining chip, proof the Abbotts could play hard, proof they could force Victor to sit at a table under terms that didn't flatter him. But the tension rose almost immediately. Matt recognized there was no unified center holding their plan together. Jack wanted order. He wanted the moment to stay inside clear boundaries, so he'd have a safe exit if Victor turned the room into a trap. Kyle wanted speed. He wanted to push the pressure until Victor had no choice but to bend. Neither motive was irrational. But side by side, inside a room charged with Newman power, those motives became two opposing forces, and the rope of control began to slacken. Matt seized on that slack the way he was built to. He didn't plant suspicion with loud provocation. He used posture, timing, small reactions that nudged attention in the wrong direction. He didn't need to challenge anyone directly. He only needed people to look at each other more than they looked at him. If Jack and Kyle were busy arguing out loud or in the silence of their ice about the right way to hold him, the right way to structure the exchange, the right way to protect their advantage, then Matt had already gained what he needed: time. And in rooms like that, time is the most dangerous currency of all. Because the longer a moment stretches, the more fatigue blooms, the more arrogance creeps in, and the more certain it becomes that someone will blink. The Abbott security team, however trained, were still human. They felt the pressure. They felt the unspoken rivalry. They felt Newman eyes waiting for them to slip. That pressure made them more likely to overreact to small cues and miss the cues that mattered. Matt exploited that perfectly. He created the illusion that everything remained contained. He let them believe he was tied down by procedure, that he was just a piece placed on a board. But inside his head, the board had already shifted. The piece wasn't meant to be played, it was meant to flip the table. The moment Jack and Kyle's disagreement sharpened about custody, about positioning, about what came next, room tilted off its axis. Jack didn't want a scene, didn't want violence on Victor's land, didn't want the plan to turn into a headline. Kyle, trapped by the suffocating weight of the ranch and the hunger to win, felt the urge to push harder, to force a conclusion, to prove the Abbotts weren't merely reacting to Victor's world. No dialogue was needed to form the goppiest, the change in their stance, the shift in their attention, the microsecond of divided command. Matt saw that gap like a door left ajar. He moved with boldness, but not with chaos. One step at the right time, one turn that used a blind angle, one clean, fast action that disabled a guard before anyone fully processed what was happening. It wasn't a long fight. It was a surgical cut. like pulling the safety pin from a grenade and letting it roll into the center of the room. When the guard went down, panic triggered a chain reaction, formation broke, distance collapsed. Signals overlapped. Jack saw it and felt cold rush through his spine in it because he feared Matt's strength, but because he recognized the deeper consequence on Victor's turf. A single second of disorder was enough to paint the Abbotts as amateurs. Kyle felt a different shock hit, humiliating. Furious because he understood he had helped steer them toward this cliff, and now the cliff was giving way beneath his feet. Matt didn't create chaos only with force, he created it by making everyone lose orientation. In panic, people stare at the danger in front of them and forget to watch where the danger is going. Matt used Jack's instinct to restore order and Kyle's instinct to salvage face, and turned both into restraints. Jack's priority reestablish control was reasonable, but it made him slower to track the escape. Kyle's priority of the Abbotts hadn't lost the room was understandable, but it pulled his focus away from the one thing that mattered. Matt didn't need to overpower them. He only needed them to split in the exact way he predicted. And then Matt was gone. His escape wasn't merely a criminal slipping past guards. It was a slap across the face of Newman authority and an indictment of Abbott confidence. In the instant Matt vanished from sight, the atmosphere shifted from tension to disbelief, and from disbelief to rage. Jack felt as if something vital had been drained out of him, not fear of Matt, but fear of what came next. He had brought a threat to Victor's front door and let it slip out of his hands. Kyle felt blood rush to his ears. He knew this moment would haunt him, not as a tactical failure but as a failure of nerve, of maturity, of judgment. The Abbott guards were stretched between the urgency to pursue and the sting of humiliation, because they understood what the Newmans would read in this. Proof that Abbott control wasn't as airtight as Abbott pride. Victor's fury detonated. Victor didn't need to shout to be terrifying. His anger filled the room like pressure in a sealed chamber, making it harder to breathe. He looked at Jack and Kyle with the expression of a man who doesn't accept mistakes, doesn't accept explanations, and refuses to tolerate anyone turning his home into a stage for their failure. He demanded they take full responsibility for the escape. And responsibility didn't mean simply recapturing Matt, it meant owning every consequence. If Matt struck the Newmans in any way, beneath Victor's demand was a message he didn't need to verbalize. The Abbotts had walked themselves into weakness, and he would not waste the opportunity to make them pay for it. Jack heard the demand and felt himself trapped between steel jaws. He wanted to push back, to protect his family's dignity, to remind Victor that this entire plan existed because Victor himself was impossible to trust. But in this moment, Jack had no leverage left. The naked truth sat between them. Matt escaped while Matt was in Abbott custody. Jack hated the sensation of being cornered by Victor. And deeper than that, he hated himself for believing he could bring a man like Matt here and still maintain the upper hand. All the things Jack prides himself on: discipline, calculation, honor, had been tested by one simple reality: a ruthless mind only needs one human lapse to turn a structure into a doorway. Kyle carried a different kind of crushing weight: shame. He wasn't only afraid of Victor, he was afraid of Jack's eyes. Afraid of the question that didn't need to be a skedhead Kyle pushed too hard, too fast, too recklessly. Kyle had wanted to prove he belonged at this level, that the Abbotts weren't destined to play defense forever. But Matt's escape dragged out the shadow side of that ambition, recklessness disguised as courage. Kyle tried to cling to excusement: it was too clever, anyone could have been outplayed, it was a fluke. Yet the tighter he clung, the emptier he felt. Because another truth kept scraping at him: he had let emotion, impatience, ego, hunger to win infect the plan. And Matt had smelled it. From that moment on, Matt became a bigger threat than he had ever been in restraints. When he was captive, he was leverage. When he was free, he became a moving shadow carrying information, anger, and the sick satisfaction of a man who had just turned two powerful families into a spectacle on their own battlefield. No one knew where Matt would strike, how he would punish them, or how he would widen the crack he had carved between Newman and Abbott. But one certainty hardened in the air: every decision from here forward would be haunted by the question of where Matt was, and what he was building while they blamed each other. The damage wasn't limited to the rivalry between two families. It cut through the center of each man involved. Jack had to face the brutal fact that even the most carefully built strategy can collapse under a single second of human distraction. Responsibility sat on his chest like stone, responsibility to the Abbotts, to their name, to the fact that he had pulled Kyle into this game and now Kyle could be burned by the fire Jack allowed to spread. Kyle stood between Tefur's Victor's wrath and Jack's disappointment, and both were sharp enough to cut him open. He still wanted to prove himself, but now he had accidentally proven the opposite. Even Victor, for all his rage, was forced into a reality he despised. Matt was now a threat to Newman as much as to Abbott. Victor could punish Jack and Kyle, he could demand repayment. He could tighten the screws until Abbott pride cracked. But he couldn't deny the cold logic of the situation. If Matt was out there, anyone could become a target. In Victor's world, a common enemy sometimes forces a temporary alignment, even when the men involved would rather stab each other than share a plan. That alignment, however, would be poisoned from the start. The Abbotts would fear being controlled. The Newmans would refuse to appear dependent. Every step toward cooperation would carry suspicion, every promise would hide calculation. And the next mistake might not be losing a captive, it might be losing someone far more valuable. When night fell over Newman Ranch, the unease didn't fade, it thickened. Jack left with his mind heavy as lead, knowing every eye would frame Abbott as the spark that lit the crisis. Kyle left with a fracture in his confidence that no bravado could plaster over. Victor remained with anger that hadn't cooled and a sharpened vigilance. The most dangerous enemy isn't always the man across the tablights, the one who uses the table as a distraction while he walks out the door. And somewhere beyond the ranch, Matt was free. He didn't just escape custody, escaped with an invisible prize, the chaos he planted between Newman and Abbott, the doubt he injected into Jack's certainty and Kyle's ambition, and the fury he ignited inside Victor. Matt understood something simple and lethal: when powerful families start blaming each other, they slow down, they make worse choices, and they become easier to manipulate. He didn't need to come back immediately. He only needed to let them grind each other down with pressure and paranoia. Because the real question isn't whether Matt escaped. The real question is what he wanted beyond escaping and whether his next move will hit Newman or Abbott first. While both sides are still staring at each other like enemies, Newman Ranch that day felt like a velvet-covered trap polished on the outside, with the familiar rituals of Newman power sharpened on the inside, with blades waiting to collide over one name: Matt Clark. Jack entered the negotiation with the posture of a man who had calculated every exit and still knew he was walking a wire. Because he wasn't just carrying a bargaining chip for Abbott Enterprises. He was carrying the last intact piece of Abbott pride into a room ruled by Victor Newman, a man famous for refusing to bend when anyone tries to force his hand. Kyle followed Jack with the restless intensity of a new generation that wants to crack the old order, to prove the Abbotts no longer exist, to watch the Newmans write the rules. Yet the deeper Kyle moved into Victor's territory, the more his confidence was ground down by pressure that seemed to seep from every corner of the place. Victor, meanwhile, stood as if the room and even the air inside it belonged to him. His calm wasn't peace. It was the calm of someone who believes no one can make him do what he doesn't want to do. Matt Clark was held like a living chess piece, and the fact that he was living made everything more dangerous. Jack understood exactly what he was doing by using Matt as leverage. But he also understood the double risk in turning a human being into a tool: moral risk and strategic risk. In Jack's mind, this piece had to be placed precisely strong enough to force Victor to listen, controlled enough to keep the Abbotts from looking like kidnappers or manipulators. Jack wanted victory and cleanliness at the same time. He wanted to pressure Victor while preserving Abbott's ability to step away, without becoming a public villain. Kyle saw Matt as a rare chance to flip the board, and he couldn't hide the feeling that if they pushed hard enough, Victor would have to give something. For Kyle, the moment Victor took a single step back would be proof the Abbotts still had weight. Proof Kyle's instincts weren't just noise. But that impatience also made Kyle easier to provoke, more likely to turn a negotiation into a personal duel instead of keeping the wider frame Jack was struggling to protect. Victor didn't need to raise his voice to freeze the room. He looked at Jack and Kyle the way he would look at two men trying to bring a weapon into his house, and then use it to dictate terms. He refused to yield, insisting that Matt was not an Abbott-controlled asset and that Victor Newman would not be boxed, and certainly not on his own land. Victor warned the Abbotts about consequences, not as theater, but as a reminder of how these battles are judged beyond the room. If the story ever spilled into the public, the Abbotts would look dirtier first, because they were the ones who brought Matt here and made him a condition. Jack felt the pressure clamp down because Victor was half right. The Abbotts were more vulnerable to the optics, more vulnerable to the interpretation that this was coercion instead of strategy. And yet Jack couldn't retreat. If he backed down now, Abbott Enterprises lost its shot and Jack lost the fragile control he had staked with his own name. The tension escalated in the way old rivalries always do: no wasted motion, no need for extra words. Just eyes and breath and the invisible weight of history. Jack tried to keep the moment inside rules, tried to prevent emotion from turning it into something reckless, but a low, bitter anger still burned beneath his restraint, anger at Victor's instinctive superiority. anger at how Victor always acted as if surrender was something other people owed him. Kyle felt the insult more directly. Victor's dismissal made Kyle want to strike harder, to force acknowledgement through pressure. Victor saw Kyle's volatility as a doorway, something he could open by pressing the right nerve. And Victor saw Jack's caution as a weakness too. Jack cared about reputation, about narrative, about keeping Abbott clean enough to survive the next day's headlines. Victor knew exactly how to turn that fear of scandal into a leash. Then the negotiation was interrupted, not by a small disruption, but by the sudden arrival of a third force that changed the heartbeat of the room. Adam Newman entered like a spark dropped into a pocket of compressed air. He didn't walk in with the posture of someone asking permission. He walked in like he belonged there, and that alone forced Victor to swallow an immediate flare of irritation. Victor hates being reactive. He hates variables he didn't place on the board, especially when that variable is Adam. Jack and Kyle were thrown off their rhythm too, because they understood something instinctively when Adam enters a scene. It is never simple afterward. Adam claimed he had explosive information about Matt, and the air shifted from raw confrontation into sharper vigilance, because in this world, information is power and explosive is another word for a bomb. Jack felt the risk multiply instantly. The Matt card he was trying to keep inside a controlled negotiation threatened to become wildfire. If Adam's secret pushed the story beyond private leverage into public catastrophe, Kyle felt a dangerous rush of hope. If Adam truly had something, could that be the crack that finally forced Victor to slip? Could the Abbotts use that moment? Victor, however, watched Adam with deep suspicion. Victor knows Adam never acts out of timing alone. Adam acts for Adam, and Adam's help always comes with a price. Adam didn't stretch the moment into pointless mystery. He demanded a higher position at Newman Enterprises in exchange for revealing what he knew. That demand sliced directly into Victor's image of absolute control. Beckhouse. It meant Victor was being bargained with from inside his own family in front of his enemies. Jack recognized the move immediately. Adam was using a new Manabot confrontation as leverage to pressure Victor internally. Kyle saw the first visible fracture and nearly wanted to lunge toward it. But Jack saw a more complicated danger. If Victor was being squeezed by Adam, Victor would be even less able to yield to Abbott, because yielding now would look like losing control from two directions at once. Victor had to choose between crushing Adam on the spot or swallowing his anger long enough to keep the board from scattering. Victor's silence grew heavier, because beneath it was a private calculation few could read. Victor despises being negotiated with, but if Adam truly held something damaging about Matt, ignoring it could cost the Newmans more than his pride. Jack watched Victor and understood that real power is sometimes the ability to endure without revealing fear. Kyle read the silence differently, as a sign Victor was finally being cornered. And Matt, still in the center as the piece, remained the gravitational pull of every orbit. A name dirty enough to weaponize and dangerous enough to contaminate anyone who held it. Just as Adam complicated the room, Victoria Newman stormed in and turned the negotiation into a family battlefield. In front of Abbott's eyes, Victoria didn't arrive to decorate the scene, she arrived to seize control. Her target was clear: stop Victor from using Matt in a way that could poison the Newman name. Victoria's concern wasn't vague anxiety, it was the fear of someone who understands how fast a narrative can destroy a legacy. One wrong headline, one leaked detail, one twisted version of this meeting, and the Newman family wouldn't just lose a round, they would lose the image they've spent years building. Victoria challenged Victor because she saw the trap. Matt might be leverage, but the dirtier the leverage, the easier it is to cut the hand holding it. Jack watched the internal clash with a feeling that was half opportunity, half dread. Opportunity because division inside the Newman family could weaken Victor. Dread because when a powerful family starts arguing about reputation in front of a rival, they often respond by crushing the rival to restore order. Kyle felt the thrill of witnessing Newman fracture under pressure, but Jack refused to celebrate. He understood the risk. Any visible Abbott satisfaction could be used against them. Proof: the Abbotts came to exploit Newman chaos rather than negotiate in good faith. Victoria demanded that Victor hand Matt over to her management so she could limit damage and control any leaks. The demand was strategic and personal at once. She wasn't only trying to protect the family, she was also proving she could keep her head when Victor was cornered, when Adam was bargaining, and when Abbott pressure was tightening. Victor heard her and felt the sting of challenge, because in Victor's mind, control is not something to be shared, especially not demanded in front of Jack and Kyle. Adam watched it all like a chess player watching two major pieces tug in opposite directions, knowing his own value rises when the board becomes unstable. The moment was no longer a triangle of Jack-Victor. It became a layered structure: Abbott versus Newman, Newman versus itself. Adam bargaining for power, Victoria guarding reputation, Victor fighting to keep the crown steady. Jack felt the negotiation slipping into a chaos he hadn't planned for. But he couldn't withdraw because withdrawal meant losing Matt, losing leverage, losing the one opening Abbott had forced. Kyle felt himself pulled toward action, toward instinct, toward the urge to grab control with his hands. Jack held him back with the steadiness of someone who knows storms are not beaten by emotion. Then the shock hit from a direction no one in the room could truly command. The police arrived. Their entrance was like cold fingers at the back of every neck, because it yanked the story out of private power games and into legal reality, into public consequence, media questions, official records, and procedures no Newman or Abbott can simply rewrite in the moment. The police announced they had received an anonymous call about Matt Clark's criminal behavior, and they were there to arrest him. That single phrase, the anonymous call, changed every expression. Who called? From where? Why now? And most of all, what were they trying to destroy? Jack felt his bargaining chip turn to sand in his hands. If the police took Matt, the Abbotts lost their strategic piece and risked being painted as the ones who unlawfully detained him or attempted to manipulate a criminal situation for corporate gain. Jack understood that one wrong note, one badly framed detail, could drag Abbott Enterprises into a storm of legal exposure and public outrage. Kyle's anger surged because the feeling was unbearable. They had pushed Victor this far, forced the pressure this tight, and one legal strike on sudden enforcement action blew the entire structure apart. Kyle wanted to resist, to keep Matt in place, to reclaim control. But Jack understood that resistance now would only make the Abbotts look worse, and would turn a complicated situation into a clear public indictment. Victor didn't win either. The police rival stripped him of the control he had insisted on. It forced him into the kind of position he hates most, obeying someone else's rules, on his own property. Victoria saw her fear becoming reality in real time. This could leak, could spread, could become a public scandal with the Newman name stamped across it. Adam felt the ground shift under his bargaining power too. If Matt was removed, Adam's explosive information could lose value or become the only remaining weapon. If the secret was worse than any arrest. But Adam couldn't look rattled. Looking rattled is losing. He had to stand as if he still held another card even while the table was being flipped. Matt was taken into custody, and it felt like a door slamming shut on every calculation both sides had been making. Jack didn't just lose math, lost timing. And timing is everything because whoever controls the first story controls the advantage. Kyle felt victory ripped away inches from his hands, and he tasted bitterness in the realization that they had been so focused on Victor that they forgot the law can be activated at any second, especially when someone in the shadows wants to sabotage a deal. Victor watched Matt leave and felt a new kind of fury not only at the Abbotts, not only at Adam and Victoria, but at the idea that someone had the audacity to call the police to Newman Ranch and reduce Victor Newman to a man reacting. Victoria immediately thought of damage, leaks, headlines, whispers. The family name dragged through mud because of a criminal arrest on the ranch. Adam's mind recalibrated fast. If he truly had something explosive, the anonymous call either intersected with his secret or was a separate move, meant to prevent that secret from being used in the room. Either way, the board was shifting into a more dangerous phase. The emotional reversal came too quickly for anyone to be ready. Jack had to swallow frustration while calculating how to minimize legal and public fallout, while also keeping Kyle from exploding. Jack felt himself forced into a familiar role, the one who cleans up wreckage others help create, except this time the wreckage sat in front of Victor, in front of Newman eyes, in front of police, and potentially in front of the public if a single detail slipped. Kyle was torn between loyalty to Jack and hatred of helplessness. He wanted to do something, anything to regain agency. Yet he also began to realize that doing something in the wrong moment is exactly how families like Abbott get destroyed in the court of public opinion. Victor and Jack, duo rivals who would rather dominate than cooperate, now forced to face the same threat, consequences. The Matt Clark situation was no longer about who used whom as leverage. It was about who would be dragged into the light, who would be questioned, who would be tied to a criminal arrest that could become a public spectacle. Victor couldn't allow anyone to believe Newman Ranch was a place that harbored or manipulated criminals. Jack couldn't allow anyone to frame Abbott as kidnappers using a hostage to win corporate advantage. Victoria's new reputation had crossed into danger territory. Adam understood that the game had turned colder when law enforcement steps in. Every sentence can be recorded, quoted, weaponized. And just when it seemed the scene ended with Matt being taken away, one raw, uncomfortable truth rose like a thorn in the throat: the anonymous call. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. Someone wanted to break this negotiation. Someone wanted to cut Matt out of both Newman and Abbott hands. Someone wanted to force this private war into a public and legal crisis. And if Adam truly held explosive information about Matt, the question became darker: was the anonymous call connected to Adam's secret? Or was Adam's secret the exact reason someone had to rush Matt into police custody before it could be traded in that room? When the last police footsteps left Newman Ranch, the silence that remained wasn't the silence of an ending. It was the silence of a storm changing direction. Jack looked at Victor and saw an enemy still infuriating, but now threatened by the same loss of control. Victor looked at Jack and saw a rival still stubborn but now cornered by the same legal and public danger. Kyle looked at them all and realized there are days you walk in expecting to win, and you walk out realizing you've been pulled into a much larger game. Victoria understood she might have to move decisively if she wanted to keep the Newman name intact. Adam watched each face and understood that true power isn't always what gets said inside the room, it's who pulled the strings outside it. If Adam arrived with a bombshell about Matt, and an anonymous call brought the police at the exact moment both Newman and Abbott were trying to control him, what secret was so dangerous that someone chose to destroy the negotiation at any cost? And when Matt starts talking in custody, whose name will be dragged into the next phase first, Newman or Abbott? On our TV Spoilers channel, I'm always looking for content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting insights. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.